Okay. Well, I'm thrilled, honored, humbled, and almost speechless to have today with us the original Richard Lucien Bisson, being the Richard Lucien Bisson Jr. that I am. And I'll give you an introduction, then you can chat more about that.
Okay.
So you were born in 1934 in Bath, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And you were born to Lucien Bisson and Yvette Messier.
Right.
There were 8 children, I think, born by your mother.
9.
9.
She had 9 pregnancies, 5 lived.
5 lived, yes.
One, of course, lived to be 11, who is the really original Richard Lucien Bisson.
Oh, he was Richard Lucien.
He was Richard Lucien.
Oh.
I never knew him. I was born after he died.
But he was referred to as Lucien.
Yes.
His name was Lucien. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. And he lived till he was 11.
Yeah. Died of leukemia.
Yes. You have 5 children of your own.
Yes.
Successful in business, active in the community and the church. You retired fairly early at 56.
I was lucky to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Fortunate.
Yes.
And have been, having a good life after that. So, healthy and enjoying it.
Grandfather to 8 grandchildren.
Right. So far.
And great-grandfather to 11, soon to be 14.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, that's right. That's
the number that's going to expand. The other one, I don't think you're going to change.
The others are pretty well fixed. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start with, what was it like growing up for you?
In 1940, I would have been 6 years old, and it was a difficult time. Although I didn't realize it, but my parents had gone through some pretty traumatic periods there, unbeknownst to me. I mean, I didn't realize all of that until I got older, how difficult their life must have been. They didn't have much money, and suddenly going through the sickness with this child and having several stillborn. But nonetheless, we were at the beginning of World War II. In the very infancy. And we were living on High Street, 648 High Street. And it was a time when business was really flourishing. But you have to understand that the employees that my father had were mostly people who were not qualified to be in the service. So they all had some problem, which he had to somehow overcome and manage these people to get them to do what he needed done. And he was a hardworking guy. I mean, he had an office at 29 Commercial Street in Bath.
Which is now the freight shed.
Yeah. And, that was the center of the universe for us, because if you didn't go anywhere else, you went to 29 Commercial Street for whatever reason. And so he worked with these people. It was kind of comical. He had this one man who worked for him. His name was Willard Monty. And my father kind of abbreviated his name and called him Monty Willie.
Monty Willie.
So that name stuck with us. But as a kid growing up, our babysitter sometimes were truck drivers, because he'd put us in the truck with this driver who was going to go. And I can remember a number of times going out to Harding's, which was where Ironworks stored a lot of the merchandise. I couldn't get out of the truck. They wouldn't let me out of the truck. But I would poke my head out the window and watch the crane take the things off the truck and put it in the warehouse. And
how old do you think you were?
Oh, probably 10. 12 years old, maybe, something like that.
And what kind of truck would you have been in?
Oh, my gosh. This truck was a 1934 International. It was a tractor. It had a trailer. And my father did business with this guy over in Union, name of B.M. Clark. And he was a Yankee trader kind of guy. And this trailer that my father had really was a tank trailer. And B.M. Clark took the tank off and leveled the floor so that this trailer was flat. Never had any brakes on it, on a trailer. And that poor trailer was used for everything.
So it was basically a modified flatbed.
Modified flatbed.
From a tanker.
And he used that for everything. And we hauled all kinds of stuff with that. And my father was not a person who was very forward-thinking about making a job easier. It was a matter of getting the job done. It wasn't necessarily always the easiest way. And one of the things that he did or had was a thing called a gym pole. A gym pole was a 4x4 timber, probably, maybe 14 feet tall. And it had a metal thing on top. And he had a way of tying that up against a railroad car and guying it off. And then he'd take a cable to a snatch block on the top of the pole and one down at the railhead there somewhere. And he'd run this cable by having a truck back up and pull this thing out of it. We unloaded cast iron pipe for the water district. And anything that came in the car that we could lift out with this thing. Later on, he finally did hire a man with a crane, but for a long time, we used this gym pole.
The gym pole, so the cable would go underneath the railroad track because the railroad track was solid enough to hold it, stabilize it.
So we had two snatch blocks, and we'd lift this up to the edge of the car, swing it around this gym pole, and then put it on the trailer. We did that time and time again. But
so you're 10 years old or so, and your babysitter is a truck driver, and he's taking you out to Harding's, which is Beth Ironworks, basically manufacturing site, which, that back then was probably that was the main road.
Yeah, that was Route 1.
Route 1.
Yeah.
And that was probably a 10, 15-minute ride or more?
Well, you had to go up over Center Street Hill.
Yeah. And Witchspring Hill.
Which was loaded.
Yeah.
And the trailer was loaded. And I remember one day going up the hill, and I wondered if he had enough gears, because he kept shifting down, and I wondered if he was going to have enough gears to get up over the top of the hill. But obviously we did.
Yeah.
But
did you have to make the hard left at the top of Center Street then too?
No, Court Street. Court Street continued on and picked up Route 1.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, yeah. And, we unloaded... across the street from my father's office was Tory Roller Bushing Work. And they made bronze castings and portholes for ships. Heavy castings they were, with big, thick glass on them. And they used molding sand to cast these things. This molding sand came in a railroad car. And it was a kind of sand that was very dense. And to get that out of that railroad car, we used shovels and wheelbarrows. We would spend probably 2-3 days unloading this car, shoveling onto this trailer, going over to Torrey's. And
so you'd shovel under a wheelbarrow it over across the road?
No, onto the trailer.
Onto the trailer, okay.
Then take the trailer over to Torrey's. And they had a place where you could back up, and we shoveled it off the trailer and we had loaded one on a Friday night or a Saturday, whatever it was, and I knew it was in the yard loaded. And I wanted to drive that truck so bad. I didn't have a license.
You were how old, probably?
Probably 14. And I was there helping load this thing. That was part of what I did. And so I convinced my father that if he let me drive it over to Torrey's, which wasn't far, just around the corner, that I would unload that truck. And by golly, I did. But I got a chance to drive it up Front Street, back down.
You might have taken the long road?
Back to of course. I didn't. But I got a chance to drive the truck. That's what I wanted to do more than anything else. So, but I unloaded it by myself. The whole Sunday afternoon, I shoveled that thing off that trailer. Yeah. But I mean, work was not something that you gave a lot of thought to. It just came automatic. I mean, we were brought up in a work environment, and it was not uncommon to. I mean, when I was in high school, I always knew I would go to the shop after school. Sometimes if I'd get a call in the office, and the secretary would tell me that my father called and wanted me to come right down because he had something that he wanted to be sure that I was going to do. Not that I wasn't going to go anyway, but
so this wasn't to take you out of school for the day. It
No,
was
no.
to say you need to make sure you go to work this afternoon.
The only time I left school to work, and it was because we as a class had a paper drive, and we stored the paper in the barn at the Sedgwick Hotel. So we had this whole lot of paper that we'd collected, and it had to go to Portland. We had to deliver it to Portland. And so a couple of my classmates and myself, we got this with the other class, loaded the paper on the trailer. But they only worked 5 days a week. So we couldn't go on a weekend.
Mm.
So we skipped school and took the truck and took it over to Portland and loaded the paper. But that was the only time I ever did that.
Shucks, I had to not go to school and I had to drive a truck. Is that what that is? And by the way, you friends, you're coming with me.
Yeah, right.
Who went with you? Do you remember?
I think Brady Belanger, and I don't remember who else it was. But there were three of us anyway. We went over to Portland and delivered it.
Mm. So work was definitely a big part of even growing up as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
What's your first memory? I mean, you were 10 and they were babysitting you, but were you down at Commercial Street before then? Do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, my mother had plenty going on at home. And the two of us, both Francis and I, were...
Francis is your younger brother.
Younger
Uncle
brother.
Francis is...
Yeah.
And he's 2 years younger than you?
He's about a year and a half.
Year and a half, okay.
Yeah. His birthday's in April, I think.
Yeah.
But it was, a woman asked me one time what I did for sports after school. And I said, well, I drove truck. That was what I did. I mean, I went every day. It was not uncommon to go down to the shop after school, and there'd be a truck there loaded with probably 2,000 cases of sardines. And they weighed 28 pounds a box. They had cans of sardines in them.
How many cases did you say?
2,000.
2,000.
And we'd go down and throw those cases of sardines on skid rolls to a railroad car. And so...
I remember the skid rolls.
Yeah.
I love those.
Yeah. and I didn't need any... I really didn't need physical ed at high school. I was getting plenty of physical ed after work.
Mm.
And it wasn't, I was happy to do that, and I would go back to the sardine factory and get another load. We might sell 4,000 cases of sardines.
Mm.
No big deal.
Yeah.
It's just what we did.
Who were you doing it with, Dad? Who would you have done the sardines with after school?
Well, it would have been, some of his regular employees. I had a cousin, Phil Messier, who worked for my father. He worked for the railroad, but he also worked, when he had days off, he worked for my father. And he might be in the car stacking the sardines. Might have been Francis. Mm. It could have been the two of us. He was a little behind me, but nonetheless, he was front and center, just like I was. He did the same thing. Mm. The other thing I was going to say was that my parents didn't have a car. He had a little international truck with probably a 14-foot body on it, I guess.
Wooden body.
Yeah, wooden body with a canvas top on it, and a canvas thing that went across the back.
Almost like a military truck.
And the bench that's in the GMC was in the back of that truck. And when we went to Mayor Point, or we went to Brunswick, for a long time, the four of us, Phyllis, Janine, Francis, and myself, would ride in the back of the truck. That's how we got around.
On that bench?
Yeah, on that bench.
Mm. Been a lot A lot of Bisson butts on that
been
bench.
a lot of butts on that bench. Yeah, yeah.
Because your grandchildren and great-grandchildren right on that
Yeah,
bench.
right. And it was built by my grandfather.
Mm.
So, but we didn't consider that a hard life. I mean, we had we spent our summers at Mare Point. I've told people that I think, as our memory was, that I put my bathing suit on when school let out, and I think I took it off the day I had to go back to school.
Mm.
And the rest of the time, we were playing in the water, fishing, and boats. And I've just recently sold my boat, and I said to somebody the other day that I've been boating been in a boat since I was about 10 years old. So I've had a fair career of boating as well.
So at Mare Point, down in Brunswick,
Yeah.
were there Messiers and Bissons there, or did it start out as Messier or Bisson? How did that get started?
Well, I think my father came along after some of the Messiers had already built their places down there. But he had, for some reason or other, had a well put in. And it was an exceptional well in that he supplied all of the relatives with water from that well.
Because it was a compound. It became a compound down there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of the family members there, aunts and uncles and so on and so forth. But it was a good community. And then on the weekends, other relatives would come down. So it was a real family event.
That's what I remember.
Yeah.
I just remember, I almost remember that anybody that was there was family.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't remember their names necessarily, but they were one side or the other, and somebody would try to explain to me who they were, and
yeah,
I would be confused.
Well, it wasn't hard to get confused because there were a lot of them, and they all got along well as a family, and it was a good community.
Mm.
We'd have an uncle who had a outdoor fireplace, and they had this grill thing that they put on this outdoor fireplace, and they'd cook hot dogs and hamburgers in this thing. And I remember one aunt who was being very efficient. Instead of taking relish and mustard and ketchup, she mixed them all together, so you get it all in one shot.
So you spent a lot of time at Mare Point.
Yeah.
As a young kid. So
Yeah.
did everybody stay down there? I mean, did your mother stay there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
because Grampy ultimately built a camp.
Yeah. Well, he built a camp. He had this man that worked for him. He lived on South Street. He was a carpenter, and at the time, the ironworks was receiving a lot of merchandise in crates, and these were well-built crates. I mean, so you could get this lumber, and I can remember the camp originally was on posts. You could crawl under the camp and look up at the floor, and it would say "Ship the Bath Ironworks" on the boards that were. But this guy would take this wood, and somehow he'd make it work. I mean, it was all new wood there as well. But in some cases where it wasn't important that he could use some of this, he would use it. Mm. My father would drag it home. Well, I was going to tell you that this 34 International that my father had as a truck, he eventually, I don't know what was going through my father's head, but he eventually brought that to Mare Point for me. It had one wheel brake. The left front wheel was the only brake that worked on it. And there was a farm up the road that I spent a lot of time at, working or whatever, and I drove this truck back and forth to this farm.
Oh, to Smith Farm?
Mm.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. Again, no license.
Because you're how old?
Yeah, probably 14. And like I say, I just don't understand what my father's thinking was. But, he was well, I mean, that wasn't the only case. There were a lot of times when I questioned what his decision-making process was, because For example, he sent me one time with 2 fishermen, Vern Chase and Omar Perry, to Brooklyn, Maine.
Brooklyn, Maine is way down
Way
east.
down east. These 2 fishermen had a new boat built, and I was to get down there and bring that boat back. And my father gave me these 2 huge planks, loading planks, block and tackle, and some rolls. Like I say, he didn't have much mechanical equipment, no winches or anything like that. So I'm driving down to Brooklyn with these 2 old critters in the truck. And the 12-foot tide's down there. It's low tide. And the boat's on the cradle. I can't possibly get it from where it is it's grounded out now. I can't possibly get it from there up on this trailer because it was a great big high trailer.
High trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've got planks and block and tackle?
Yeah. And some rope.
And you're how old?
Probably 17, 18 years old, maybe something like that.
And you got these 2 guys that are older that have just bought this brand new boat that you're going to get.
Yep. So I pondered and pondered, what am I going to do? Well, I finally realized that there was a road that came, I dragged it with a trailer, the cradle, and I dragged it up the road, and there was a hill, and I dragged it to the top of the hill and backed the trailer up so it was more or less level, and put these planks out, and finally got this thing, because these 2 old guys helped me. I finally got it on the trailer. Well, it's now pretty late in the afternoon. I mean, it's getting dark. And I know that this boat is really high on this trailer. And I was concerned. And I know that the branches were kind of low in some cases. But we got to get home. So we struck out for home. And the next morning when I went over to where the boat was, I had realized that it did break one of the windshields. But that was all. But I didn't know what was going to be left.
Because the truck drive to Brooklyn was probably how long?
Oh, I don't know. You know, back then, all Route 1, and it was all slow going stuff through traffic lights.
Probably 4 hours.
Yeah.
Maybe?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe 4, maybe more. Yeah.
Well, he sent me to Eastport one time to get a load of mustard for the sardine factory. I picked up a load of empty barrels at the factory and took them over to Eastport to get full ones. And I struck off early in the morning with a road map. I didn't know where Eastport was. I just had to figure it out.
You didn't have a computer display on your screen telling you take a right turn in 3 miles or a mile, I mean?
And I'm by myself, I just figure it out. But that's what he did. I mean, that was how you got along. You made it work. Mm-hmm. He sent me to Milo one time. And I got as far as Gardner. I had a load of castings from Hyde Windlass going to there's a railroad shop in Milo, and they were going to machine these castings. And I got as far as Gardner. And the state police have got a huge roadblock. It's the wee hours of the morning. I mean, we left like 4 o'clock. Wee hours of the morning. Here are all these lights and all these state police. And I am petrified.
Do you have your license?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I had a license then. But, but I get through. Everything was all right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what did you do? What at Mayor Point? What would you spend? How would you spend your days at Mayor Point when you were a kid in your bathing suit?
Well, my father had, the ironworks was reconditioning some boats, and he had bought from the ironworks a raft. It was one of the life rafts, and it had a floor in it that you could stand on. And we pushed that thing around the cove everywhere and went out in that. But one of the things that we did a lot was we'd go fishing for dogfish. And we thought that was a lot of fun because they looked like a shark, when you caught them. They were really
good fighters.
They were good fighters. Plus, they'd be in the boat and you'd think that they were dead and dormant and all that sort of thing. Next thing you know, they'd come to life and start flopping around. But anyway. Yeah. But I almost drowned down there. the people on the farm used to, when the tides were right, they dig quahogs. So I mean, I'm hanging around with them, and so whatever they did, I'd go too. So they're out digging quahogs, and I'm just doodling around but I'm getting some quahog. So they put them in a container for me, and we have to take them across the bay to where George Lasky had a place over in Quahog Bay there, over in the Cove. And they had a flat iron skiff. They'd made these boats themselves. They were just a boat simply made, and they weren't very big outboards. Then they had 2 5-horse Sea King outboards on the back of it, a gas can, no life jackets, and loaded with quahog. And we got probably 4, 5, 6 inches of freeboard. Now there's 2 girls, myself, and the 2 boat operators. So there's 5 of us in the boat. And as we get
loaded down with quahogs.
And we're loaded with quahog. And as we get out into the bay, crossing the bay, the wind is coming up and the water's starting to lap up against the side of the boat. And I can see that now it's hitting the boat hard enough so it's coming over the gunnels. And didn't think ahead that was going to eventually not be a good thing, but eventually it did, and down it went.
The boat went down. 5
of us in the water, and the only thing that's floating is this gas can. Got probably a few gallons of gas left in it.
How old is everybody on the boat?
Oh, the 2 girls were probably 18, 19. I'm probably maybe 12, 13, something like that. And I had a brown sweater on. And I swam every day. I was a good swimmer. I had been accustomed to the water. But because the thing happened so quickly, I sort of panicked. And this brown sweater stretched out over my hands, and I'm floundering around in the water. And one of the men realized that I was in trouble. And there's another girl that was in trouble too. And he brought this gas can over to us, and so we could hang on to that. And eventually, a boat came out and picked us up. But
was it the metal gas tank?
Yeah.
For the motors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gas for the motor.
A metal roundish kind of thing that's not really you got to cling on to it.
That's right. And it was typically the farmer fisherman kind of deal, where I didn't have a cap on them.
Oh, was that right?
So I put my thumb over there because I didn't want it to fill with water. But, we made through that. But the thing that always kind of amazed me was that it seemed as though my mother didn't worry about where we were. I guess she would have worried if we hadn't come home. But she never knew. She never knew these things were going on.
Sure.
My father had a boat called a semi-dory. It looked like a dory that was cut in half. And he had bought a 5-horse Elgin. And typical kid fashion, I'm out there with this boat, and I've got the motor swung one way. So I get the boat going just as fast in the circle as I could get it to go. And I'd immediately swing the motor around the other way and see how long it took for the boat to switch and go the other way.
The motor's just revving
wide open
before it can turn.
Oh, yeah. I'm out in front of the house doing that. And I did that enough times so that at one point in time, the motor wasn't attached very well to the back of the boat, I guess, because the next thing I know, the motor fell off.
Down to the bottom?
Down to the bottom. And Father got it back, but he took it to see us, and they said, no, it wasn't.
We've got this one you can buy.
But, I mean, those are the kind of things that, us boys were doing. I mean, it wasn't just me. Francis played a part in this as much as I did, somewhat, for the most part. But, yeah.
So there's 5 kids at this point in time, right?
Yeah.
And you've got the first 3 are girls.
Yep.
And Jackie was how older?
Jackie was older enough so that she was not at the house when I remember her. She had gotten married and gone before. I mean, I knew her certainly as a sister and visited her and so on, but she was different than the others because I grew up with Phyllis and Janine, but not Jackie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you had Phyllis, Janine, Francis. I mean, that's who was in the house with you. And were they all at Mare Point?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we moved down there, really. I mean, theoretically, we just left High Street and went down there for the summer. So that was home.
And Phyllis is how much older than you? She was?
Let's see. Phyllis is probably... Janine is 2 years older than I am. Phyllis would have been probably 4 years older than I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Close enough in age that you were around and together.
Yeah.
What else about Mare Point was significant?
I don't know. It was... my father had a field up and back, and I can remember going up there. He had a big garden, and in this field were these wild strawberries about the size of your small fingernail. And we would go up there with my mother and pick these strawberries, and she would make strawberry jam. She canned strawberries, and she made strawberry preserve, and she canned beans and tomatoes and everything she could. And we took them to High Street, and we would eat from that in the wintertime. She had a cold storage thing in the basement. And so we ate very well there. I mean, it was good life. Yeah.
And what was it like growing up on High Street in Bath?
Well, High Street was... my father kept all the trucks there for a long time in his backyard.
Before Commercial Street?
Before he had any other place to store them. And of course, that was High Street also significant to me because that was where he lost his 4 fingers. And he did everything he could to provide for the family. So when he wasn't working with his business, he had a sawing machine. It was simply a motor. It was a car that eventually they took the body off from and had a transmission and a shaft and a big saw blade and a table that they could push forward to this blade.
Big round blade.
Big round blade, yeah.
People use for decorations in their yards now.
Yeah. And he had this man that worked with him. And they would saw firewood at night and sell firewood. And they were putting a blade on this thing, and he was crouched down behind the blade, and the other man didn't see him where he was. And as a result, he cut 3 of his fingers off outright. One of them had cut the tendons, and so the doctor decided that he'd better remove that finger as well. And so he probably was in the hospital for, I'll bet, at least 3 weeks.
Wow.
Came home from the hospital, and he's in his bathrobe, and we had depleted the firewood for the stove, and he's out in the garage with one hand chopping wood.
Mm-hmm.
Tough guy.
Mm-hmm. And he kept his thumb.
Kept
right?
his thumb, yeah.
And somehow or other, he had like a stub.
Yeah.
And it was his left hand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he did have his right hand.
Yeah.
Well, he was right-handed.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do remember him being able to do pretty much anything with his right hand.
He would, it didn't slow him down a lot. It did some. I could see, from that he had lost a little bit because, you give second thoughts to what you're doing and what you got left. And he would always remind me. I could remember him saying time and time again, look out for your fingers,
Mm-hmm.
if we were doing something that looked like it, could be detrimental to your hand. So.
How old was he dead when that happened?
Gee, I don't know. I bet he was.
How old do you think you were?
Well, Janine and I had just gotten brand new bicycles. He'd gotten from us. And so it must have been, he had to get priority to get them. So, Jiminy, I don't know.
And you got priority because it was wartime.
Yeah.
And that was a luxury.
Yeah.
Because bikes would be used for other purposes.
Yeah. But he gets it too. And we were down on Middle Street, and somebody came and got us and told us that he'd had an accident. And there was no ambulance. So this guy that was working with him drove him to the hospital. And so we knew he was in the hospital, and we didn't know how serious it was. And my bedroom upstairs had a register in the floor that went directly down into the kitchen. And I remembered hearing everybody come home from the hospital, and they were talking about what had happened, and that was when I found out how serious it really was, because I didn't know.
And how serious was it?
It was serious. It was bad.
Like life-threatening, do you think? Or
well,
I don't mean that makes it sound that it had to be that serious, but
well, it was because back then they kept you a long time, and he was there for quite a while. But we knew it was bad.
I'm sure there were circulation probably issues to deal with. And
Yeah. But like I say, he came home and went right back at it again.
How did it affect him at work?
Not much.
Not much? Wow.
I mean, I can remember him grabbing the steering wheel with what he had in his hand. He would cup it here, or he would pick things up even in this part of his hand, because he couldn't.
Because you got to use both hands.
Couldn't use both hands.
Yeah, but he had to. I mean, he's got to hold the steering wheel with one and shift with the other.
Yeah. No, he managed.
So when did you graduate? You graduated from high school.
1952.
Yeah. And then you went right to work?
Went right to work. As a matter of fact, the last week of high school, the graduating week, my father had bought a new Mack tractor, an A40 Mack tractor, and a 401 cubic inch engine in it. And he let me take that to school the last week of, it still had paper on the seats, and I knew I was going to drive that truck.
This was brand new?
Brand spanking new.
Because that was probably the first brand new truck that he bought?
Well, pretty close. He didn't have much good stuff.
Yeah.
But it had a 5-speed transmission with a 2-speed auxiliary. And I drove that truck for quite a long time. It was a good truck. Yeah. Had a good time with it.
I meant to, so we've talked about, so describe Grampy's disposition, kind of his personality.
Well, he was, and Francis will attest to this too, and that is that he would start a conversation, say a half a dozen words, and then kind of stop. And you had to figure out what it was he wanted you to do from that conversation. But you did. I mean, you knew what he was implying, and you knew what he wanted you. You could catch a drift enough so that you could put the rest of it together and do what he wanted to do. And he put an awful lot of faith and trust in the two of us. I think about winter driving and things like that. And the other thing is that I said he wasn't very forward thinking in his machinery, but when an opportunity came to buy the property at West Bath, Pat Patterson, who was on the selectmen at West Bath, had a piece of property out there. It was an industrial piece of property, and he wanted to get something going with it. And he had approached me, and I had discussed with him. And I went out and looked at it, and I finally got my father to come out and take a look at it. And without hesitation, he agreed that we should buy that property. It was quite a step up from Commercial Street, which was a one-room office, really.
Really with no land.
No land.
You park the trucks on the street there.
Park a truck on the street, and the property was leased from the railroad. We didn't own it. I mean, it was just a piece of property that we rented.
And it wasn't a big building. It was really a pass-through building. It wasn't a warehouse.
No. And with that, I had some negotiations with this man in Pittston who owned the property. And Father agreed that, we should move ahead with it. And it was fortunate because we'd bought the property, and it had a couple of old storage, a couple of buildings that were kiln drying sheds, because they dried lumber there. It was a lumber producing place. They made boxes during World War II for ammunition for the military. And the building had burned.
The manufacturing building, or whatever you want to call it, had burned. All that was left then were these kiln
foundation and the kilns and a boiler room.
Oh, that's what that foundation was from.
Yeah,
the building that burned.
Yeah.
Okay.
And soon after we bought the property, they decided to change Route 1 and put the 4-lane in. So there was a company that came by from North Anson, W.H. Hinman Company, needed a place to store their trucks and repair the trucks. And we said, well, we just got these sheds. And they said, that's fine. That works perfect for them. So we rented these sheds to them. And we were fortunate that in their process of being there, they improved the property some, because they needed things to be the way they needed them. And then after they left, there was a company called Frank Rossi came in, and he was going to do the final grading and preparations and landscaping and so on. He had additional material which he brought in for us and developed the land some more. And in the process, we've also decided to build a warehouse there. And we've built this building, and it has barely been completed. It's to the point where it was built during the wintertime, and the floor had ice on it. I mean, the building walls were up, but there was no heat in the building.
With the concrete floors, you mean, had ice on them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Francis and I had bought a forklift at that point, and the sardine factory had a bumper year. They needed a place to store sardines. They loaned us a furnace, which we put in there, hot air furnace. We just temporarily hooked it up in there. And we're driving over this icy floor with this forklift, bringing pallets of sardines in. And it just was luck that kept one thing after another. And we had things going all the time. I mean, but it was always to me, it was always looking for an opportunity. What could I do different than I was doing? And when I first started working for my father, we had tremendous summer business with a sardine factory. I mean, we were busy every day. But then things came fall, and there wasn't quite as much to do. So seeing trucks parked in the yard, and I saw perhaps snow as an opportunity. And I ended up with like 5 or 6 different snow plows, and we plowed banks and parking lots and driveways and anything we could do. I had worked out a deal with a contractor in Wiscasset, and he had a gravel pit, and I knew he shut down in the wintertime, so I rented his front-end loader. I used that in the wintertime to plow with. So, But then, and then the other thing that happened was with the oil business. I could see that we had plenty of activity in the summertime, but this wintertime thing was a slow period for us. And I saw these trucks hauling heating oil. And I knew that they didn't haul heating oil in the summertime, but they had to haul it in the wintertime. And so I talked to my father about it, and we went down to Massachusetts and found this used tank. It had been repainted. I mean, they'd put a lot of puff on it, but it was pretty well worn out, as I found out later. But he went ahead with me. We bought this tank, and I went down and got it. And
how old were you at this time, do you think?
Oh, maybe 22, 34 years old, something like that.
And how about when the warehouse started being? When did you buy? How old were you when you bought the land?
Probably in the mid 60s.
Okay,
Somewhere in there.
so 34. Okay,
And then, you know, we built that building first, but actually we built about 5 different commercial buildings. We built that building. We built a building released to the ironworks. We built a maintenance shop out back. We added on to the original warehouse. We doubled the size of that. We built a building in Portland. We built a building in Augusta. And
you built the Nissan building,
as
we called it, in West Bath.
Yeah. And, you know, I got to give credit in that area to Francis, because Francis was an equal partner with me in the business. And he was really good at being able to work with contractors. He understood construction and all of the technologies and terminologies that need to be used there. And he did that. And he purchased all of the equipment, forklifts and trucks, and he could spec those things out, and he knew what he was doing with it, and did a really good job with it. So he was we did a lot of rigging jobs. Probably the one that was the scariest and that I remember was we had a shoe machine in the Verney Mill building on the top floor.
Verney Mill building,
which is just as you exit off before the Frankwood Bridge, before you go across the Frankwood Bridge,
in between Brunswick and Topsail.
Yeah,
the big brick mill there.
So it's on the top floor of this building, and pretty good sized machine. And we're pushing it across this wooden floor, and the floor is sagging down. We go over a beam, it would go up and down, and so it's got to come out this. If you look at the building, there are these places where there were like doors, and that was how the machinery got in and out of there. So it's got to go out this door, and Francis has hired Crooker's Crane, and so you push this machine partway out the door, and hanging out there, and you hook on one end of it, pick it up, push it out a little further, and you hook on the other end of the machine and pick it up. And my heart is in my throat just about every minute that's going on. Because
you're right up there watching it, hanging out the window.
Yeah. I finally got down in the truck, and I can breathe again. Yeah. But, you know, we had a message in the office that said, if the Ironworks calls and asks us to do something, the only ones that can say no are Francis or I.
Cool.
Because we want to accommodate them all we can, because we were anxious to do business with them, and we did a lot of business with Ironworks. So they had this job that came up. They had a 100-foot mast that was going on some submarine somewhere.
I don't understand a mast on a submarine. I've heard the story many times.
Yeah.
And Francis told it the other day. Why would a submarine have such a big mast?
I couldn't tell you that. I just know that the challenge was they had to move this mast from Hardings to Bath. Mm-hmm. And what were we going to do? So here's Francis, and he's dreamed up this idea. We had this old truck that was a derelict truck, and he went over and cut the front end off the truck. So we got just the steering wheel and the wheels. And he welded a platform on that so we could stand the steering wheel. And we took a low bed, and we put a 5th wheel on the very back of the low bed. And Ironworks made up this thing that would accommodate this antenna that would set on this 5th wheel on the back of the low bed. So now we're stretched out with 100 feet plus the tractor and the low bed. And it happens to be a rainy day.
Happens to be a rainy day.
It happens to be a rainy day.
Yeah.
And Francis is standing on this platform because there's no cab or anything. He just out there. And he maneuvered it like a fire truck would be. Like they have the steering on the back of the fire truck.
On the back to drive the kind of ladder on the back.
So when we
right?
got to a corner that we needed to go around, that we couldn't negotiate, he would turn the steering wheel and would steer this thing around the corner.
And there was no trial run.
No trial run. No, it was the one-shot deal, and that was it. But it worked. Yeah.
Well, it's a pretty amazing that not only did you not say no to the ironworks, but they had the confidence to keep calling because what you did.
Well, and probably some bizarre stuff happened as a result of it, but it was challenging. You had to use your brain, think about it, and resolve the issue. They had a move that they wanted to make one time. It was the drafting department from the top floor of the main office building. Well, over the years, they had taken empty files up there and filled them. And so we're looking at this job and realizing that there's no way that there's no elevator. And you would just destroy people trying to get these things down over the stairs or somehow out of this facility. So Francis and I dreamed up this idea where we got the ironworks to take a container and 2 cranes and pick the container up. We took the window out of the 4th floor. And we took everything else through the window and loaded it in these containers. And we had 2 of them. We were rotating them back and forth, unloading one and loading the other one. And that worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
But I mean, you had to think about how to solve that problem. And we did.
So where do you think you had two different minds, yours and Francis, working on this. So I'm sure that helps some, but where do you think all that came from? I mean, you had to come from someplace.
Well, I think it was, in business, if you don't solve problems and get things moving along, you're going to be dead in the water. You've got to be imaginative, creative, risk taker. All of those elements, will keep you going. But if you hang back from all of that, probably not going to get much going.
Probably going to get run over.
Yeah, exactly.
By somebody.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Grampy. What was he like as your father? I know he was your boss probably more than anything, but in the earlier days when he was your father, was he around? How did that work?
Well, he was, because we had this thing where we rode in the back of this truck,
mm-hmm.
and we all went to church together. And wherever we went, like Janine had to go to the doctor's one day, we all got in the truck and back of the truck and took her to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, it was family all the time, and probably that's what it has instilled family in my mind. Is the kind of he was he amazed me because he put a lot of trust in us. And I don't know why he saw that, but somehow or other he felt confident that whatever he asked us to do, we were going to do it somehow. And he never was one to be hard on us. He was always, seemed the same kind of guy all the time, and I'm sure we made mistakes. I mean, that was going to happen, but I had started several businesses that really didn't fly. We were a dealer for Goodyear at one time, selling tires. We had this garage, and I thought, well, what else could we do with the garage? We could sell tires. Well, it really didn't work out. I mean, it's the old Kenny Rogers saying, you got to know when to hold them and you got to know when to fold them. And there was a grain business there was a man that had a grain business and he retired. And I thought, well, there's going to be a void there. So I connected with Agway and get in the grain business. Well, that wasn't the best match. But there again, we eventually got out of that. But the one thing that did happen that was positive for us was I happened to see in a magazine, because we were doing local moving for people in the city, occasionally we'd get a request for a move out of state. And so it kind of got the juices going a little bit about, could we capture that market as well? And I saw this article in this magazine. We had been talking with, I think, Burnham Van Lines at the time, came close to signing with them, but I saw this article for Beacon's Van Lines, looking to recruit agents. And I responded to the ad, and sure enough, we ended up being an agent for Beacon Van Lines for a number of years.
When do you think that was, Dad?
Oh, gosh. We actually started with them when we were on South Street before we moved to West Bath.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. We got into a little bit of a rub because we had put an ad in the Yellow Pages, and Noise,
Earl W. Noise and Sons.
Yeah, he had come after us and said that we really didn't have the truck that was in the picture. Didn't own the truck that was in the picture. So, but we did have, eventually we got this truck. I don't know whether we had it then or not. But anyway, it was the beginning of the competition in the moving business. But it worked out fine in the end.
It became the beginning of competition because it was recognized as competition.
Yeah. Well, we were taking some of that traffic away, and that was of some concern to them, rightly so.
Mm. So I was thinking back to when you talked about, Grampy and a boat and a motor and a truck that, you've got down to Map Point to drive around on. Do you think maybe he was reliving some of the things that he went through when he was a kid or wanted to?
Well, perhaps so. Because he came to the States from Canada as a French-speaking Canadian, got his citizenship because he was in World War I. And I don't know, his growing up in Canada, I think, was pretty docile. I don't think he had a lot going there.
He was one of 13 children.
Yeah, yeah. And, the trucking business certainly wasn't anything that developed as a result of his family association. I mean, it was something that he didn't. He got in the trucking business primarily with a horse and a wagon in the beginning. And I don't know what possessed him to do that. He worked for a man by the name of Brown who had been in the moving business. And I think that's what kind of got him get the idea of being in the trucking business. Mm. So he worked with the horse and wagon for a long time.
Mm. So he worked with the horse and wagon for somebody else?
For himself.
For himself?
Yeah.
Okay.
He had his own wagon, own horse and wagon. Mm. Yeah.
How many years do you think he worked horse and wagon doing deliveries?
Oh, I don't know, because that was way before my time, and I don't know. Mm. But he eventually, as a result of being in World War I, one of the vehicles that he drove was a 1919 GMC, and he was quite partial to that truck. He thought it was very dependable, and so that's why he bought the one that he bought.
So he had experience in that truck.
He had experience in that truck, yeah.
And this is you have the replica of this truck now.
Yeah.
Replica, I mean, it's just, it's a 1919 truck, but it's not the same truck.
No, it's about 2000, 2000 serial numbers off. And the second truck was a Rio Speedwagon that he drove. And he drove them until there wasn't much left. Well, in those days, that was the way it was. These trucks had the GMC had a headlight that you had to light with a match, and he always had to remember if he was going to be out at night. He didn't smoke, so he had to be sure to take matches with him. Lighted headlights.
Now, legend has it. How far would he drive for a job?
I heard tell that he had been up in the White Mountains with a truck before.
That's what I'd heard.
Yeah. So
something about a baseball team too.
Yeah, he had hauled this baseball team. I don't know what the original truck looked like, but it must have had some kind of seats in it that he hauled these people around.
Maybe it was a yellow bench.
Yeah, that was before the bench, I guess. But yeah.
But he hauled the baseball team.
Yeah.
For some kind of game. They probably played the game, he watched, and then they drove back.
Yep. Yeah.
In a minor, is there any suspension in that truck? I guess there's leaf springs, yeah.
But the placard on the vehicle says you drive it more than 30 miles an hour. It's going to avoid the warranty. And believe me, you didn't want to go faster than 30 miles an hour.
Probably not. So we talked a bunch about Grandpa. Your mother.
My mother was a wonderful person. She had the customary job of bringing up the five of us. And during World War II, when food was scarce, had to make do with what she could to feed the rest of the family. She always provided us with home-cooked food. We always ate at home and had wonderful meals. She unfortunately died a horrible death from cancer.
She was 70, I think.
Yeah. She died when your mother was pregnant with Joe. And because of her illness, I had seen her suffer the way she had, and was actually pleased to know that she was comfortable in the end, because that was the only way she could ever be comfortable. But I also felt some compromise, because I knew that her death was going to be the life of somebody else. Joe was going to be born.
Oh.
And
Joe, so a little bit about that. Well, no, let's not go there yet, but we can. So she was a great cook. I mean, I can remember her.
Oh, yeah.
We'd go there Sundays after church, and gee whiz, the food, the smell.
Yeah.
And the parties that she'd have, and all the spread of food.
Yeah.
Because I guess I was 7 when she died, but I remember the few years before that of having food at the house.
Yeah. Yeah, she
made some good sweets.
And there was a lot of affiliations with French food. I mean, my parents spoke French to each other, and probably the misgiving that I have in my life is that of all the time that they were speaking French, unfortunately, I was going to English-speaking school, and they're teaching me English. And I did not pick up the French that I so much would love to have had. But it was interesting, because she could reprimand me in French, and I knew what she meant. I didn't speak French. And there were a few occasions when that was necessary. One of which was they had left Francis and I home alone one time, probably, maybe the first time, I don't know. But they had a Glenwood stove in the kitchen, wood stove. It was getting a little cool.
Did she cook on that stove?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
She baked in that stove, cooked on that stove.
Yeah.
I can remember taking a slice of bread and just putting it on the top of the stove, and it would almost instantly burn. Grab it quick and take it out. But so it was getting a little cold, and Frances and I decided that we ought to get the wood stove going. So, because we put in big pieces of wood in the stove, not so it was going to really get going, but we had some paper and things in there, and it wasn't going. So I decided that I had gotten a Campbell soup can with an open top on it, and my mother used to have Renews It, which is a cleaning fluid, dry cleaning fluid. You'd dry clean your own clothes with this Renews It stuff. And it was really kerosene.
It might have been flammable.
Oh, very flammable. So I put some of this in this can, and I had the sprayer. And I gave it a squirt onto the piece of paper that was in the stove. And of course, it flared up. And when it did, the fire jumped into the can that I had. So I got a can of fire in my hand, so I threw it on the floor. Went on the floor. And we got a fire in the kitchen. So I know we need help. So I said to Frances, I knew that across the street there was a fire alarm box. I said to Frances, better go pull the fire alarm box. Frances runs across the street. I've got both faucets in the sink on, and I got a mop. And I'm flailing this thing around trying to put this oil fire out with water.
So how big is the fire now?
The fire
is
has
this like
gone,
the size of a bucket, or is this up the walls, or?
Well, it scorched the kitchen cellar door.
Which was right to the right of the stove.
Yeah, right. And it isn't good. But Francis had gone out to the fire alarm box, and he wasn't tall enough to reach the handle. So he's jumping up trying to get this handle. And these couple came and walking on the sidewalk and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "My house is on fire." I'm trying to pull the fire alarm box. So the couple said, "Well, Pastor, we go to your house and see what's going on." So these two people walk in with Francis. And at that point, I've got it pretty much under control. To the point where, where we know we're not going to burn the house down. But my parents aren't home, and we got some problems.
We got some fixing to do.
So we write a note, and the cellar door that was charred, put the note on the door and said, "We had some problems. Tell you all about it in the morning."
Okay. Oh, so you went to bed. They come home, they get a charged basement door, because that's where they'd walk out from downstairs. That's where the garage was, in the lower barn. And
they didn't wait till morning. We had to fess up. But those are the things that our parents challenged, the challenges that they faced with us boys. Because we were pretty active guys, and we were thinking of stuff faster than they could, they could cope with it.
Francis told a story the other day about the two of you. You were in the back of a truck one time, and something was going on. And you and Francis got in a tussle or something, and Grandpa had to come out and straighten it up.
Well, the neighbor.
Oh, it's the neighbor.
The neighbor could see us in this truck. We were rolling around the back of this truck. Called my father and said, "Joe, you better go check out those boys."
There may not be anything left of them.
We didn't physically do that, though. I mean, that was the only time I remember that we actually physically did anything. We did play dirty tricks on one another, I guess, to the extent that I had a friend who was a neighbor. We chummed around together.
Who was that, Dad?
Frank Talbot. And Francis was kind of like a third wheel there.
Well, you were a year and a half older when you're 5.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit. When you're 7, it's still quite a bit, even at 10.
Yeah. So Francis wants to come with Frank and I. And we said, no, Francis, we're going to Brunswick. I mean, we're going to walk. I mean.
You're how old?
I don't know, maybe 10, 11. So we just said that casually to get rid of him. And come dinner time, no Francis. Boss says, you know where Francis is? No, I don't know where he is. I haven't seen him. Any idea where he might be? Well, I don't know. I said, last time I talked to him, told him we're going to Brunswick. Father got in the truck. He got as far as Hardings, and Francis is in Harding, headed for Brunswick. He was going to go find Frank and I.
Well, Francis tells, so you got to put this story together some, because Francis told us a story the other day, and he said he was 5, I think, didn't he?
Well, could be. Yeah. I
mean, much younger.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he's walked about 5 miles.
Yeah.
As a 5-year-old down the main road.
Well, I mean, it was not, like I said, my parents were not careless and loose or anything like that, but it was a different time. And there's a newspaper article one time about this person that the police had found asleep on the steps at the bank on Front Street. It was me. I had wandered away from the house, gone downtown, but I mean, the police knew who your parents were, and it was a safe community.
Mm-hmm.
And
how old were you when you fell asleep on the bank steps?
I don't know. I don't know how old that was, but
like
it was in the paper.
But you were 10, 12, or you were 5 or 6? You think?
Maybe 8.
Maybe 8. Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, as I say, as long as we came home for dinner, that was all that was important.
Right.
The rest of it, you were on your own. Go do what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, your mother, home. She took care of home.
She was a homebody.
Yes.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Always there.
Taught the girls.
Yeah. Sewing, and she was very talented, very frugal. We lived in a very good house. It was very comfortable.
Mm. She was born in Brunswick.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She worked at Bernie Mill in the mill. My father and mother met in Brunswick, and they hatched this deal to save money to start this business together.
So, Grampy had to buy this horse and jigger to get started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he first came to Brunswick, he worked for a bakery delivering bread. And I think through the process of making deliveries and working through part of the English community, he learned to speak English. I think that's how his English came. And my mother could speak English anyway, I think, Jimmy. I don't know that both of them were bilingual and very, very fluent in both languages.
Yeah. So she grew up in Brunswick, and they had a family, the Messier house there on Cumberland Street, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, I think Grampy came in 1916 is what I read.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that date. I know that he came on a train, and he knew to get off in Brunswick because his brothers had told him that he was to get off in Brunswick. And when he saw the sign in the station, he knew that was where he needed to get off.
Long train ride.
Long train ride from Canada.
For a Brunswick sign.
Yeah.
Now, his brothers, there were 13 in his family. I think there were only 2 girls. 2 or 3 girls, I think, from what I understand. Yeah. And 4 of his brothers had already come down here, or ultimately there were 5 of them that came, I think.
Yeah.
But other brothers came down before he did.
Before he was, and they encouraged him to come, I think. That's why he came, because they had encouraged him to come.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he had a job. They had offered him this job, or foresee that he could have a job when he got here.
Mm-hmm.
And he started driving this bread truck making deliveries around Brunswick.
Mm-hmm. And the bread truck, the owner of the bakery was Joe Healy.
Joe Healy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it said Joe on the side, Joe's Bakery on the side of the truck,
Joe
right?
Healy on the side of the truck.
And there's two theories of how he became, so Lucien Bisson, with no middle name, your father, became Joe Bisson.
Yeah.
And some of that theory is that because he worked for Joe Healy.
Yeah, and we've got two sides of that story. The other one is that everybody in the military calls everybody Joe, and that's how we got it. So we're not really sure how it happened, but
the Joe Healy part, because he worked for Joe's Bakery, didn't speak any English, they would assume he was Joe.
Yeah.
And Lucien probably wasn't a common name.
No, and you know the bakery was part of. It was in an area that would, you know, you would describe sort of Little Canada, because they had stores that sold merchandise that was foods that were relative to the Canadian people, because most of the mill people all came from Canada.
There was a big French Canadian population in Brunswick.
Well, when I was growing up, it was very common to hear French being spoken a lot of places. As a matter of fact, at St. John's Church, where we went to church, I think like 3 of the 4 masses on a Sunday were French.
Were they? And St. John, was that would have been the St. John Church that's there now?
Yeah.
Yeah, same one.
Yeah.
That was built in the early, actually like 20s or so, wasn't it?
Parents were married in the basement of that church.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was school like?
Well, we went to the Catholic school in the beginning. It was part of St. Mary's, and they had a rectory, a church. The nuns had a home, and they had a school out and back. And fortunate for us, the school had wooden floors, and the floors would tend to be a little dusty. So the way they would control that is they had some kind of oily mix that they put on these floors to keep the floors from emitting dust. Well, I need to tell another story about the school. I probably was not the best student, and I decided that I'd gone home for lunch, and I decided that I was not going to go back in the afternoon.
Because to walk from school to where your home was half a mile.
Yeah.
Or so, maybe a little more, but not much.
And I mean, then walking back and forth, even to high school, we never rode the bus. We always walked, snow, whatever. So I decided I wasn't going to go back. And my parents had a second thought there, and that was that I was going to go back.
You're in what grade now, do you think, Dad?
Oh, I'm probably in the 4th grade, maybe, something like that. And my mother called my father up. And the next thing I know, I could see the truck drive up out in front. I knew the jig was up then. There was no more negotiations. So I got in the truck, and my father drove me to the school, took me in, and sat me at my desk. And I can remember with my head down on the desk, and I'm crying, and the water's dripping off the edge of the desk as I'm sitting there crying. But I went to school every day after that. And the bad part about it was the school burned one night, right to the ground. I mean, had we been there as students, it would have been a horrible scene because it was so flammable and all that the thing just literally exploded. So then that was the end of, we went to the nuns took us into the convent for a while, and we were there as students, but it was so jammed and so tight that it just, obviously it wasn't going to work. We ended up going to the schools.
South Street School.
Yeah. I went to Week Street, South Street.
Week Street, yeah. Do you have any recollections of your grandparents?
Not grandmother, but grandfather. I went to Three Rivers one year, and he was still alive, but I couldn't communicate with him because he spoke no English. So I never could ever have a conversation with him, but I do remember him.
But your grandfather was Joe Bisson.
Yeah.
Which is the irony of, Grampy, who had, they did not provide a middle name, became Joe Bisson.
Well, our Joe is named in sort of commemoration of all of those Joes, I guess,
right.
however they got there.
Yeah, for sure. What about memories of Canada and Trois-Rivières and Pont de l'Arc?
My father went religiously every year. He always maintained a relationship with his family and friends and people in Pont de l'Arc. And we would go to the sugar house. He had a family member who had a big sugar operation where they would make maple syrup. It was a farm, and we'd been there a number of times. They had a son who was older than I was, but he was trying to teach me French. And they had a problem with one of the pieces of equipment they gathered sap with. So he has taken it to town to get it fixed. And you get to town by putting a thing in the trailer and hauling it with a tractor, garden tractor. He let me drive it a little bit. And the road was quite rough. And
how old do you think you are this time?
Maybe 12, something like that. And so the road's quite rough, but he can't speak any English, but he does say to me, good roads, high speed, bad roads, slow speed. And I think at that point he took control.
Because maybe you were going a little fast on the bad road, a little slow on the good road. This wasn't advice. This was a reaction. You mean?
He was in the barn milking the cow, and like I say, he's always trying to help me learn some French. He slaps the cow on the side and says, "Vache." So I picked up a few words here and there.
Well, it must be hereditary because I know you taught me some words, and I think the two that I still remember are Tuniver and
Maktu.
When we would work together, you would say, "Hand me the Maktu." Tunivis.
Well, the other interesting thing about my father was that he would carry on a conversation with somebody that he's English speaking to, and somewhere in this conversation there might be a word that he knows better in French than he does in English. So up would pop this sentence with so many words in it in English, and then up would come this French word, and then back to English again and keep going.
And whoever was listening would piece that together.
Would put it together. Yeah.
Huh. What'd you drive for vehicles? What were your vehicles?
The first car I had was a 1934 Ford Coupe, which was a neatest little car. I actually bought it before I got my license. A woman from Bangor had come through and had some mechanical problem, and I bought it from Don Emerald. And I couldn't drive it, so he had one of his guys drive it to my father's house for me. And my father came home at night and said, "Whose old car is that in the backyard?" I hadn't told him that I'd bought it. I mean, it was one of those things where you could pay him $5 a week or whatever it was, for this car. It wasn't very much anyway. But it was a really neat car because back then it had push-button starter. Transmission was on the floor. The downside of it was that it had mechanical brakes, and I could never get those adjusted so that they were really effective. And they would slow the car down, but you certainly couldn't drag the wheels.
Mm.
And the safest time to drive the car was in the wintertime, because if you couldn't stop, you could always head for a snowbank. But I drove that for quite a while. And I think the second car that I had was a 1952 Ford Fairlane. And I had graduated from high school, and my father took me out to the Ford garage, And I saw this car, and he had negotiated the sale for me, and I had a new car,
Brand new car.
brand new car. And I thought, boy, I got a wonderful father. He's bought this car for me. So we get home, and he says, okay, he says, this is what we paid for the car. This is what it's going to cost you every week. And he had also, I at that point, I graduated from high school. So at that point, he said, and I have this insurance policy that I have on you, he says, and don't let it lapse. So that's when I realized that there was responsibility that went with whatever you were going to do. There was also an offset of responsibility. Mm-hmm. But he taught that to me very quickly, and we did. We paid for the car, but that was the beginning of my transportation.
Mm-hmm. What was your favorite car?
My '55 Chevrolet, because I met your mother in that car, and it was a nice little car. It took me a lot of places and a lot of memories. Mistake was I ever got rid of it. I should have kept it, but life goes on.
That's right. There was one that had a modified muffler, I remember hearing. Which one
that was
that?
A 34 Ford. I had found an old Victrola that had a megaphone in it, and I had fashioned that onto the exhaust because I wanted it to make more noise than it's supposed to. I also had a cutout on it so that you could, as a cable in the car, you could pull, and you could, instead of the exhaust going to the muffler, it just exited out the side of this pipe in this car. So it could be quite loud at times, but you did have to be a little careful because...
Would it be that loud when you left the house?
Oh, no. No, that would only happen away from the house. Yeah.
Who were some of the mentors that you had when you were growing up?
Well, probably Francis and I were in business for 40 years together. And we remained close all that time. And he probably, I needed him and he needed me. And we got along very well together in business. And so he was a big influence because he could do some things that I couldn't do, and I could do perhaps some things that he couldn't do. So the mix worked very well together.
And it seemed like you recognized that. I mean, you both could see that.
Yeah. I think oftentimes think about, what it would have been like if I hadn't had him there, and, what would I have done? But I could always depend on, we could talk together in the office and make decisions, and yeah.
I mean, you ran a big business.
Well, yeah, we had, I think the high point of our employment was like 120 people.
You had 5 locations, I think.
Yeah. And it was sometimes hard to keep all of it together because there was so much going on. But the one thing that we did do was we were front and center every day. I mean, pretty much every day. And we were hands-on people. We were there to run the business. And so we felt that was an important thing to be.
The thing that I guess nobody would know unless you were there was you talk about your relationship for 40 years. And I don't know about before my memory, but my memory was always the office at West Bath where, people had their own offices, but you and Francis shared an office.
Shared the office.
I mean, you had an open concept, 2 desks, one on each side. The boiler room was on Francis's side that would kick on, cause a little distraction. But you both worked in the same office. I mean, your phone conversations, I don't know how you did your meetings, I guess whoever was coming in to talk to both of you.
Yep, that's what it was. I mean, there were no half and half. It was all shared information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Matter of fact, we both had incidents with each other. the Ironworks had they wanted to rent some trailers. And so Francis searched around and found, he was a great one to find this equipment. Found these trailers, there was a half a dozen of them, I guess, we bought. We rented to the Ironworks. And they had some tire racks or something on them that didn't need to be on there. They were just going to be trailers to bang around the Ironworks with. So I had gone out with an acetylene torch and I was cutting these tire racks off. I liked working in the shop. I loved to weld. I learned to weld and burn, and
that was a big part of the operation, was manufacturing, making things, fixing things, oil tanks. I mean, I remember you coming home some nights not feeling real well because you had to be the guy that went down into the oil tank to clean it out.
Yeah, I mean,
probably.
Yeah,
probably. If OSHA ever saw you do that, I mean,
it's thrown the book at us. Yeah. But so I was under the trailer cutting these racks off, and I had a pair of burning goggles on, so they're dark and I can't see much. And for some reason, I came out from underneath the trailer, and I got the torch, and I turned with the torch, and Francis is standing there. And I've gone right across his stomach with the torch. So I burned his stomach. Mm. But in retaliation for that, we were putting an addition on the office. And we had laid the studs out on the floor. We were standing them up. And we had a level. And Francis had a sledgehammer, and he was pounding on the stud to get it plumb. And I was watching the level. Well, he missed the stud. And I'm standing there, and he hit me flat on the head with a sledgehammer. Well, I mean, the blood is coming, and you'd think that I was going to be dead in a minute. They rushed me to the hospital.
I don't remember that, Dad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They rushed me to the hospital. Jerry Jordan took me to the hospital.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. And I get to the hospital, and the doctor was looking at my head. And he said, I know it looks bad, he says, but when you have a head bleed, he says, you bleed a lot. He says, and I haven't done any stitching today, but if you want me to, I'll stitch it up. I said, if you don't need to, don't. So we didn't stitch it up. He put a bandage on it and sent me home. Mm-hmm. But, so we paid each other back.
Not premeditated, I don't believe.
No.
What do you think were some of the best decisions you made in life?
Oh, marrying my wife. Best decision of my life. And having children. And having family. And enjoying my family. I'm as family as you can find, because that's, to me, is the basis of all your happiness. And even thinking ahead to grandchildren, how excited you can be to have great-grandchildren, and to have one of them come over and visit you is a highlight of your day. So, yeah, marriage is my number one thing. And some of the things that were positive in our life, buying property and developing it, and having some success in business was a big thing. I mean, in my career, I was president of the chamber, president of the Rotary, president of the PTA, Woolwich PTA. I was Cub Master when Joe was in Cubs, but I was involved with whatever there was going on. Whatever the kids were doing, we would gravitate to that activity because we wanted to be involved. And I don't regret any of it.
Kind of along that line, what advice would you give to your grandchildren who are who are delivering your great-grandchildren?
Well, life is hard. It really is. You have to work very diligently at it. It's not going to come easy, but it is important to put every bit of effort you can into it and to be happy. Nobody should go through life and not be happy. So if you can maintain a relationship with your spouse and your family, it's the greatest gift you'll ever have. And I certainly encourage them to do whatever they can to be happy in their life and have a wonderful marriage and children, and life can be good.
I remember you saying many times, not too many times, you're born and then you die. And what you do in between
makes a difference.
Makes a difference.
Sure does. And you can't waste any of it. Time goes by very quickly. You realize too late that there are things you should have done sooner than later. But nobody can forecast that for you. You have to figure it out yourself, and it'll come automatic. Mm-hmm. It's there. It's all in the cards.
Well, and I remember being a kid. I don't know when it was that this kind of came to light. You know, you'd go to work. You used to come home to lunch every day.
Yep.
And then you'd come home at night, and usually you'd have your work clothes on.
Yeah.
And I guess for a while, your work clothes at work were your work clothes at home. And you'd eat dinner and then work around the house.
When I was first asked to be a Rotarian, I was still very active at work and physically working. And I felt in the beginning sort of embarrassed that I didn't have a dress clothes like other people had at Rotary. But I soon realized that that's who I was, and that it was okay to wear my work clothes to Rotary.
Good for you. But then later, when you didn't go to work every day in work clothes, you would come home, and you'd come home and change your clothes. And to me, that was something that I took as, okay, there was a separation from work and home. Mm-hmm. And work didn't come home with you. And I remember you working around the house, and I can remember you doing things, and I was happy to be there. I was happy to be your helper. Yeah. You taught me to be a good gopher. You taught me what a gopher meant. Yeah. And that meant you go for this and you go for that.
Yeah.
But I remember the day when all of a sudden I said, shoot, how does he know how to do all these things? And I didn't ask it at first, but one time I said, Dad, who taught you how to do all this? Did your father teach you how to do this? He said, and your answer was?
No, he was not handy. Mm-hmm. He could not. He could do things that kind of amazed me. Like, for example, just down the street from where our office was, Bath Fuel had an office, and on the second floor was a printing company, Wilfred Guerin's printing company. And he took a machine out of the second floor of that building. And I always marveled at, how did he know how to do that? Because he was not someone who was handy with those kinds of things. But, I mean, I have a picture of the truck, and he's moving a huge smokestack I think it went to the sardine factory, I think. And he's stuck on the corner of Front Street and North Street trying to make the turn. And something isn't right. They can't make the corner there. But here again, I guess he, like Francis and I, would accept these challenges and worked with whatever he had. He had this little set of dollies that's under the back of this thing, and the other end's on a trailer, but I mean, he made it work. Mm-hmm. He made a living out of it somehow, and kept going. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he's by himself. Yeah. I had help, but he was by himself.
Right. Well, I think about the work and things like that, but then I also think about, we spend a lot of time on the water, boating. But I think more significant is the time we spent at Sugarloaf. And I say that because, not only did you build the place up there, I'd like to talk about how you built it. Most importantly is the fact that you were probably 35 and had never skied before.
Right.
And picked up skiing.
Yeah.
And you didn't just pick up skiing. You had Holly, Joe, and I.
Yep.
Holly and I were old enough. I guess Joe was.
At 1 year, we had 7 season passes.
7 season passes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Holly and I didn't ski. The other girls were old enough probably to, I don't remember how that worked, but
They skied some.
Yeah.
But they didn't, they were not long timers there. They skied some, but not.
But Holly and I and you had not skied before.
Right.
I remember going to Sears Roebuck and getting new skis and boots and being very excited.
Yeah. A whole new adventure.
A whole new adventure. But, maybe you could describe how we first started on the mountain.
Well, we went up and stayed at Dick Ryan's place, who was a brother-in-law to Eddie True. And Eddie was a personal friend of mine, a really good friend of mine. I miss him today. But we started skiing with them and eventually leased a piece of property from the state to build a little place on. And I had the place built by Don Friend and some of his other associates from the vocational department on a spring break. They built it in the backyard of the West Bath property. And they built it in 2 halves. It was 24 by 24. So it was 12 feet wide and 24 feet long. And they built the 2 halves together. And I spent time at West Bath wiring it and doing some odds and ends there because it was certainly a quicker trip than it would have been to go to Sugarloaf. So I tried to get as much done as I could there. We didn't put the second floor on because I needed it. It would have been too high to haul over the road. But I eventually hauled it up there on two loads and put it on some posts on this lot. And then put the second floor on, and over weekends after weekend, we'd go up and work on it and ski some, and eventually got it pretty comfortable. And we had a good time there.
You were way ahead of the modular design.
Yeah, way ahead. Yeah. Well, it was so basic that it didn't have any sheetrock at the time. So what we did was we had all this cardboard from these mattress cottons that we had. And so we covered the walls and the insulation with cardboard. And I hadn't cut the windows in. As I could afford to buy the windows, I'd buy them, put them in, and cut a hole and so on. But in the meantime, anybody who came to the camp would write on the wall their name and the date they came and so on and so forth. So it was awfully hard to take the cardboard off because there was a lot of memories there.
Well, and we did, I remember I was probably too young, but we did some drawing. And I remember Jenny and Carolyn and their friends did some pretty elaborate, that would have been late 60s, probably early 70s.
And I still
graphic art.
Still have a piece of that cardboard today that I saved. And we had named the place Seven's Heaven. And I still have that little piece of cardboard with that writing on it.
Yeah, yeah. How about our experience on the mountain, being on the mountain? So, specifically, how we would get up the lift.
Well, we had a good friend, Danny Snow, who was a really good skier, and he'd already been there and established, and so we interfaced with him a lot. I knew him as a friend anyway, and he would take either Rick or Holly, whatever, and I'd take the other, and we'd ride up the T-bar, and everyone,
meaning we're between your legs.
Yeah, between our legs.
So we got to get in line.
I'm learning too at this point, really. I mean, I'm not a novice skier. I'm just learning. So, but Danny is the instructor, and we're taking the kids up on this T-bar and getting off, and it's only on the bunny slope, but everybody is practicing and learning and doing the best they can, And the next thing I know, these two kids that we're trying to teach are going faster than I am, and have pretty much separated themselves from me, and they've moved on, and I'm still trying to learn. I'm a late bloomer, so I have fear of falling and all those things that they don't have.
There's a difference between a 35-year-old mind and I guess maybe 7-year-old mind.
But probably one of the we'd go back to the mountain after the ski lifts had closed, and the kids would take the trays that they'd serve food on, and they'd somehow get them out of the building, and we'd go up there after dark, and they'd walk up the mountain and get on these trays and come skipping down the mountain on these skis or on these trays or anything that would slide. And so we'd stay there until well after dark and do that. But probably the most harrowing time was they had an event called canoe ski. And the Carabat it was in the spring, and Carabat was running really hard, and they had set up the slalom course in the Carabat, which was part of the event. But the part that I got involved with was you could take your canoe to the mountain. And if you can imagine this now, we're taking a canoe to the mountain. And so I got Danny Snow in the canoe and myself. We were on the bunny slope, and Holly's in the canoe. And we can't really hang on to the T-bar because too much drag. So we hook the T-bar on the seat to pull us up the hill. So we get to the top of the bunny slope, and we've gotten the canoe off now, and the canoe is headed down the hill. I mean, we are going pretty fast in this canoe with no idea of how we're ever going to stop this canoe. And so we're all a little terrified coming down the hill, going pretty fast because the lodge is showing up pretty quick. Somehow, Danny and I managed to swing the canoe sideways and get it stopped. Otherwise, we were going right through the lodge.
I'm not sure that event happened after that.
No, I think that was the only time I ever knew it happened. But we were always looking for something fun to do, and that certainly was fun.
Yep, sure was. Well, I think about my life, and ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a dad.
Well, that was not a bad thing to be, boy, I'll tell you.
Well, the reason I wanted to be a dad because I wanted to be a dad like you.
Well, I appreciate that because it's been a blessing for me to have my 5 kids, and I've loved every one of them, and it's been rewarding to me because it's been payback for me in many different ways, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And if I had it to do over again, I'd do it the same way.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Dad.
Well, it's been a pleasure to do it, and I cannot validate that all of these stories are 100% true, but they're probably 99% true at least. Anyway, there's some memories there.
Yes. Well, I love you, Dad.
Love you too.
Thanks a lot.
I love my family.
Yeah.
Thank you.